The marble floor of the penthouse lobby was slick with fresh blood. Most people would have dropped to their knees, begging for their lives as the city's most ruthless enforcers racked their slides. But Nora Dempsey just sighed, dropping her canvas tote bag. She looked past the twin giants blocking her path, men who had literally made grown mobsters weep, and locked eyes with the untouchable Dominic Caldwell. "If you don't let me compress that femoral artery right now," she said, her voice deadpan, "you're going to need a mop instead of a medic. Move." That was the night everything changed. The rain in Chicago that night was unrelenting, the kind of freezing October downpour that seeped into your bones and made the city skyline look like a bruised watercolor painting. Nora Dempsey was functioning on exactly 3 hours of sleep, a half-eaten granola bar, and the sheer, vibrating adrenaline of a 14-hour shift in the Cook County ER. At 26, she had seen enough gunshot wounds, shattered femurs, and flatlining heart monitors to strip the romance out of the city entirely. Her final errand of the night was supposed to be simple: drop off a set of spare keys to her younger sister, Clara, who worked as a concierge at the hyper-exclusive St. Regis residences. Nora pushed through the heavy gold-leafed revolving doors, shaking the rain from her cheap trench coat, entirely oblivious to the heavy silence that had suffocated the usually bustling lobby. She didn't immediately notice the two concierges trembling behind the mahogany front desk, their hands raised in the air. She didn't notice the shattered security cameras dangling by their wires. What she noticed first was the copper, metallic scent of blood. It was a smell permanently hardwired into her brain. Nora froze, her hand still gripping her damp umbrella. Sprawled across the imported Italian marble was a young man, barely in his 20s, his hands clutching desperately at his thigh. Dark, thick arterial blood was pulsing in sickening rhythm with his heartbeat, pooling rapidly around him. Standing over him was a trio of men who looked like they had stepped out of a nightmare. 2 of them were giants. The first, a man named Silas Mercer, had a face mapped with pale, jagged scars and eyes devoid of any human warmth. He held a suppressed Heckler & Koch MP5 with the casual ease of someone holding a briefcase. Beside him was Declan Hayes, broader, volatile, with knuckles tattooed in faded ink and a heavy revolver gripped in his hand. In the Chicago underworld, Silas and Declan were known as the Ghosts. When you saw them, you were already dead. People crossed the street to avoid their shadows, but it was the third man who commanded the room. Dominic Caldwell. He didn't need a weapon drawn to radiate lethal authority. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that somehow remained immaculate despite the chaos, Dominic had the kind of sharp, aristocratic features that belonged on a Roman coin. He was the undisputed head of the Caldwell Syndicate, a man who controlled the city's docks, its politicians, and its ghosts. Right now, his cold, slate-grey eyes were fixed on the bleeding boy on the floor. "Keep the pressure on, Leo," Dominic ordered, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that echoed in the silent lobby. "The doctor is 3 minutes out." "He doesn't have 3 minutes," Nora said. The sound of her voice sliced through the tension like a scalpel. All 3 men snapped their heads toward her. Silas and Declan moved in perfect, terrifying unison, their weapons instantly leveling at her chest. Behind the desk, Clara let out a muffled sob. "Turn around and walk out," Declan growled, his finger whitening on the trigger. "Now." Any sane person would have run. But Nora looked at the rapid pulsing of the blood, calculating the volume lost. The boy, Leo, was already entering hypovolemic shock. His skin was the color of old parchment. "If he's waiting 3 minutes, he'll be dead in 2, Nora said, dropping her umbrella and her tote bag. She took a step forward. I said stop, Declan barked, stepping into her path, his massive frame completely blocking her view of the patient. He pressed the cold steel of the gun barrel directly against her collarbone. One more step, sweetheart, and they'll be mopping you up next. Nora didn't blink. She looked up at Declan, her exhaustion briefly overriding her survival instincts. Are you going to shoot me? Or are you going to let me save your boss's friend? She asked, her voice dangerously calm. Because right now, you are standing on my patient's oxygen line, and you are wasting my time. Declan's eyes widened a fraction. For 5 years, nobody had spoken to him without a tremor in their voice. Silas narrowed his scarred eyes, clearly calculating whether she was an assassin or just clinically insane. Let her through. The command came from Dominic. It wasn't loud, but it carried absolute finality. Declan hesitated for a fraction of a second before lowering his weapon and stepping aside. Nora didn't wait. She dropped to her knees beside the bleeding boy, ruining her scrubs in the puddle of blood. Hey, look at me, she said to Leo, tapping his cheek firmly. I'm Nora. What's your name? Leo, he gasped, his teeth chattering. Okay, Leo, this is going to hurt like hell, but I need you not to move. She didn't look back at Dominic or his terrifying bodyguards. She ripped the silk tie off Leo's neck, looping it above the wound on his thigh. She grabbed a heavy brass pen from the shattered concierge desk nearby, slid it under the knot, and began to twist, creating a makeshift tourniquet. Leo screamed, a raw, agonizing sound, and tried to thrash. Hold him down, Nora barked, throwing a glare over her shoulder. Don't just stand there, grab his shoulders. Silas and Declan exchanged a stunned look before Dominic gave a sharp nod. The two lethal enforcers immediately dropped to the floor, pinning the boy's shoulders with surprising gentleness. Nora twisted the pen until the arterial spurting finally slowed to a sluggish weep. She locked the pen in place, pressing her own body weight against the wound with her hands to maintain pressure. She looked up, panting slightly, and found herself locked in a stare with Dominic Caldwell. He was kneeling on the other side of Leo. Up close, the sheer intensity of his gaze was suffocating. He was analyzing her, dissecting her lack of fear, her steady hands, her absolute refusal to cower in the presence of monsters. You're a doctor, Dominic stated. It wasn't a question. Trauma nurse, Nora corrected, wiping a streak of blood from her forehead with the back of her wrist. Cook County. Who did this? A mistake, Dominic replied softly. One that is currently being corrected. Before Nora could process the chilling implication of his words, the revolving doors spun wildly, and a team of men in dark clothes carrying medical bags rushed in. Dominic's underground doctor had arrived. Nora stepped back, her hands covered in crimson, watching as the professionals took over, transferring Leo onto a collapsible stretcher. She felt the adrenaline crash hit her like a freight train. Her knees wobbled, but she locked them, refusing to show weakness. She walked over to her canvas bag, picked it up, and turned to the front desk where Clara was weeping silently. I brought your keys, Nora said softly, sliding them across the marble. She turned to leave, but a heavy hand clamped onto her shoulder. Silas. The boss wants a word, the scarred giant rumbled. Nora looked at the hand on her shoulder, then up into Silas's dead eyes. I just worked a 14-hour shift, saved a boy's life, and ruined my only good pair of shoes. Tell your boss if he wants a word, he can schedule an appointment. Good night. She shrugged his hand off, turned on her heel, and walked out into the freezing Chicago rain. In the lobby, Silas stared after her, entirely stunned. Dominic Caldwell watched her disappear into the night, a slow, dangerous smirk touching the corner of his mouth. For 48 hours, Nora convinced herself It was a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by caffeine withdrawal and exhaustion. She scrubbed her shoes with bleach, threw herself back into the brutal rotation of the ER, and ignored the lingering metallic smell that seemed permanently etched into her nostrils. On the third day, reality came knocking, literally. It was 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Nora was in her tiny fourth-floor walk-up apartment in Pilsen, wearing an oversized university sweatshirt and sweatpants, trying to coax a decent cup of coffee out of a sputtering machine. When the heavy, rhythmic knock echoed against her cheap wooden door, she didn't think twice. She assumed it was her landlord, Mr. Henderson, complaining about the water pressure again. She unlatched the deadbolt and pulled the door open. "Mr. Henderson, I told you I'd look at the pipes." The words died in her throat. Standing in her cramped, dimly lit hallway was Dominic Caldwell. He was flanked by the twin mountains, Silas and Declan. The hallway suddenly felt incredibly small, the air sucked entirely out of the space by their presence. Dominic was wearing a dark navy suit this time, perfectly tailored, his dark hair immaculately swept back. He looked like a billionaire CEO, save for the distinct, predatory stillness of a man who killed for a living. "Miss Dempsey," Dominic said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly polite. Nora stared at him. Then she looked at Declan, who was scowling at a flickering hallway light bulb, and Silas, who was silently observing the peeling paint on her doorframe. "How did you find where I live?" Nora demanded, her grip tightening on the door handle. "You left a fingerprint in blood on the St. Regis concierge desk," Dominic replied casually, "and my people are very thorough. May we come in?" "No," Nora said immediately. "I don't invite mobsters into my living room before I've had my coffee." Declan took a threatening step forward, his jaw clenching. "Listen here, little girl." "Declan." "Stand down," Dominic murmured, not breaking eye contact with Nora. He tilted his head, amused by her defiance. "Leo is alive. The surgeon said your makeshift tourniquet saved his leg, and likely his life. He's my younger brother. I came to thank you." "You're welcome. Have a nice day." Nora went to shut the door. Dominic's hand shot out, his palm resting flat against the wood. The sheer physical strength in that casual gesture made the heavy door immovable. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, smelling of expensive bergamot and cold rain. "I don't think you understand how this works, Nora," Dominic said softly. "When I owe a debt, I pay it. I have brought you a token of my gratitude." He nodded over his shoulder. Silas reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick, unmarked manila envelope, holding it out to her. "There is $50,000 in there," Dominic stated. "Tax-free, a gesture. Take it." Nora looked at the envelope. She thought about her mountain of student loans, her sister's tuition, her broken radiator. It would solve every immediate problem in her life. But she also knew exactly where that money came from. Blood, extortion, and misery. "I don't want your blood money," Nora said, keeping her voice even. "I saved him because it's my job. I didn't do it for a payout from the Caldwell syndicate. Keep it." Silence descended on the hallway. Silas raised an eyebrow, the scars on his face stretching. Declan let out a low whistle. Nobody refused Dominic Caldwell. Ever. Dominic's eyes darkened, the polite veneer slipping away to reveal the apex predator beneath. "I don't like being told no, Miss Dempsey." "You'll survive," Nora retorted. "Now, if you don't mind, my coffee is burning." She expected him to push his way in, to threaten her. Instead, a chilling, genuine smile spread across Dominic's face. He retracted his hand from the door and adjusted his cuffs. "Very noble," Dominic said quietly. "A woman of immense moral fortitude. It's a shame your father doesn't share your principles." Nora froze. The blood drained from her face. "What did you say?" "Richard Dempsey," Dominic said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his inner pocket. "A chronic gambler. He's been frequenting the underground tables in the South Side for years. Mostly small-time losses. But last week, he got ambitious at one of my establishments. He borrowed heavily against a business he doesn't own." Dominic slowly unfolded the paper. "He owes me $400,000. The air in Nora's lungs vanished. Her father had walked out on her and Clara 10 years ago. He was a ghost, a toxic memory who only surfaced when he needed a $20 bill. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. "I have nothing to do with him," Nora said, her voice shaking for the first time. "I don't care what he owes you. That's his problem." "Unfortunately," Dominic said, stepping squarely into her apartment doorway, forcing her to step back. "The men holding his markers don't care about family estrangement. They were planning to visit him tonight to break his hands, and then perhaps pay a visit to your sister Clara at the St. Regis to collect the rest." Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. "Leave Clara out of this." "I am a businessman, Nora," Dominic said, stepping fully into her apartment. Silas and Declan followed, making the small living room feel like a claustrophobic cage. "I am offering a trade. Your father's debt is substantial, but my brother's life is priceless. You refused my money, so I am proposing an alternative arrangement." Nora swallowed hard. "What kind of arrangement?" Dominic looked around her apartment, at the thrift store couch, the stacks of medical textbooks, the framed picture of her and Clara. Finally, his eyes locked onto hers, filled with a dark, consuming intensity. "Leo needs a private nurse," Dominic said. "Someone who won't ask questions. Someone who doesn't panic when they see a gun. Someone I know I can trust to keep him alive while he recovers in my home." "You want me to work for the Mafia," Nora said flatly. "I want you to honor your father's debt," Dominic corrected smoothly. 6 months. You move into my estate. You care for my brother. You are on call 24/7 for any medical emergencies my men might encounter. At the end of the 6 months, your father's ledger is wiped clean, and my men will never speak your sister's name again." He took a step closer, towering over her. "Refuse, and I let my collectors do their job. What's it going to be, Nora?" She looked at Declan's sneer, at Silas's blank stare, and finally at Dominic's relentless gaze. She was trapped in a web spun by men who viewed lives as currency. But Nora Dempsey wasn't one to break. She crossed her arms over her chest. 6 months. No extensions. And if any of your goons lay a hand on my sister, I will personally show you how many lethal doses of potassium I can sneak into an IV bag. Do we have a deal?" Dominic Caldwell's smile widened, a dangerous, thrilling thing. "Pack your bags, Miss Dempsey. Declan will carry them to the car." The Caldwell estate was a sprawling, Gothic-style limestone mansion hidden behind 15-foot wrought-iron gates in the affluent northern suburbs. It was a fortress masquerading as a home. High-definition security cameras tracked every angle, and men in dark suits with telltale bulges under their jackets patrolled the manicured grounds with military precision. Nora sat in the back of the armored SUV, staring out the tinted windows as the gates swung open. Silas was driving, silent as the grave, while Declan rode shotgun. Dominic had vanished in a separate car, leaving her to be escorted by the ghosts. "Look alive, Florence Nightingale," Declan muttered, not turning around. "Welcome to the real world." "If this is the real world, I'd hate to see your property tax bill," Nora shot back instantly. Declan grunted, a sound that might have been a laugh if he knew how. She was given a room on the second floor, adjacent to the east wing where Leo was recovering. The room was larger than her entire apartment, draped in heavy silk curtains and antique mahogany furniture. But to Nora, it was a gilded cage. Her first day was a baptism by fire. She quickly learned that the Caldwell Syndicate was currently engaged in a brutal turf war with the O'Callaghan family, a ruthless Irish faction moving in from the south side. The tension in the house was palpable. The men moved with hypervigilance, and the smell of gun oil and stale cigar smoke lingered in the vast hallways. Nora established her domain immediately. She converted a spacious guest bathroom into a sterile medical bay, demanding heavy-duty lighting, autoclaves, and a fully stocked pharmaceutical cabinet. On her third day, the bodyguards decided to test her. Nora was in the kitchen, a massive chef-grade space of stainless steel and marble, making herself a cup of tea. A group of 4 enforcers, bruisers who made their living breaking kneecaps, were lounging at the island, eating sandwiches and loudly discussing a recent collection. One of them, a man named Brody, with a fresh, nasty gash across his forearm, leaned over the counter. He blew a cloud of cigarette smoke directly into Nora's face. "Hey, Doc," Brody sneered, winking at the others. "I got a little scratch here. Boss says you gotta fix us up. How about you come over here and kiss it better?" The kitchen went quiet. The men snickered, waiting to see if the new girl would blush, run, or cry. Declan walked into the kitchen just in time to hear the remark, leaning against the doorframe to watch the show. Nora calmly set her teacup down. She didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. She walked slowly over to Brody, stopping inches from him. She reached out and grabbed his injured forearm. Brody smirked. "That's it, sweetheart." With lightning speed, Nora dug her thumb directly into the raw, open wound, pressing down hard on the exposed nerve ending. Brody shrieked, a high-pitched, entirely unmanly sound, dropping to his knees instantly as his legs gave out from the white-hot pain. Nora didn't let go. She leaned over him, her voice a deadly whisper. "It looks like a superficial laceration, Brody. But given your lack of hygiene, I'd say the risk of staph infection is high. Next time you blow smoke in my face, I won't just clean the wound. I'll amputate the arm to save you from sepsis. Am I clear?" Brody, pale and sweating, nodded frantically. "Good." Nora released him and wiped her hand on a kitchen towel. She picked up her tea and walked out, stepping cleanly over his trembling legs. As she passed the doorway, Declan was staring at her, his jaw slightly slack. For the first time, there was a glimmer of genuine respect in the enforcer's eyes. "What are you looking at?" Nora snapped. "Take out the trash, Hayes." Declan actually smirked. Word of the incident spread through the estate like wildfire. The fearless girl, they started calling her. The men who previously viewed her as a nuisance or a hostage began to treat her with a cautious, almost superstitious reverence. Even Silas, the silent giant, began leaving a fresh cup of coffee outside her medical bay every morning before her rounds. But it was Dominic's reaction that shifted the entire dynamic of the house. He had watched the security footage of the kitchen incident. Later that evening, he summoned her to his study. The study was a cavernous room, lined with leather-bound books, smelling of old paper and expensive scotch. Dominic was sitting behind a massive oak desk, the soft glow of a desk lamp casting sharp shadows across his face. "I heard you made quite an impression on Brody today," Dominic said, not looking up from a ledger he was reviewing. "He needed a lesson in bedside manner," Nora replied, standing firm in the center of the room. "And infection control." Dominic finally looked up, his grey eyes locking onto hers. The predatory stillness was back, but this time it was laced with something else. intrigue, fascination, and a dangerous, simmering heat. "My men are terrified of you, Nora," Dominic said softly, rising from his chair and walking slowly around the desk. "They face bullets and blades every day, but a 26-year-old nurse with a sharp tongue has them walking on eggshells." He stopped right in front of her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating off him. "I'm just doing my job," Nora said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the sudden, erratic fluttering in her chest. 6 months, remember? Dominic reached out, his large, calloused hand gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, completely at odds with his violent reputation. 6 months, Dominic murmured, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her eyes again. "I'm beginning to think that won't be nearly enough time." Before Nora could process the heavy implication of his words, the massive mahogany doors of the study burst open. Silas stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his MP5 raised. The ever-present deadpan look on his scarred face was gone, replaced by pure, lethal urgency. "Boss," Silas growled, blood dripping from a fresh cut above his eye. "O'Callahan's men, they just breached the south wall. We're under attack." The atmosphere in the room shattered. Dominic's eyes instantly turned to ice. He pulled a sleek Glock 19 from a holster under his arm, racking the slide with a deafening clack. He grabbed Nora by the arm, pushing her behind him. "Stay behind me. If anyone comes through that door who isn't Silas or Declan, you shoot them. Understand?" Suddenly, a massive explosion shook the foundation of the estate, shattering the reinforced glass of the study windows. The lion's den had just become a war zone, and Nora Dempsey was trapped right in the middle of it. The concussive wave of the explosion hit seconds before the sound, a physical wall of force that threw Nora backward. She would have cracked her skull against the stone fireplace if Dominic hadn't caught her, his arm wrapping around her waist like an iron band. The heavy mahogany doors splintered inward, raining jagged wood across the Persian rug. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire immediately followed, echoing through the cavernous hallways of the Caldwell estate. The smell of pulverized limestone and sulphurous cordite instantly choked the air. "Stay down!" Dominic roared over the din, pushing Nora behind the heavy oak desk. The aristocratic, composed businessman was gone. In his place was the ruthless syndicate boss, who had clawed his way to the top of Chicago's underworld. He raised his Glock 19, his posture perfectly squared, and fired 3 rapid shots toward the doorway. A heavy thud sounded from the corridor. "Boss!" Silas's voice boomed through the tactical earpiece Dominic wore. "They used a shaped charge on the south perimeter wall, overrode the Crestron security grid. It's a coordinated breach, at least 20 men. O'Callahan's hit squad." "Leo!" Nora gasped, the ringing in her ears finally subsiding. "Leo is in the East Wing. If they bypassed the security grid, they have access to his floor." Dominic's jaw clamped tight. He ejected his magazine, checked the brass casings, and slammed it back into the grip. "Silas, hold the grand staircase. Do not let them reach the second floor. I'm moving to the East Wing with the nurse." "Copy that. Declan is en route to your position." Dominic turned to Nora, his grey eyes burning with an intensity that anchored her racing heart. He reached under the desk and pulled out a sleek, suppressed Sig Sauer P365, pressing it into her trembling hands. "I don't shoot people," Nora said, her fingers instinctively curling around the cold polymer grip despite her protest. "I put them back together." "Today, you might have to do both," Dominic said grimly. "Keep it pointed at the floor, finger off the trigger until you see someone who isn't wearing one of my suits. We move fast. We stay low. Do not leave my side." He didn't wait for her to argue. He grabbed her free hand, his grip tight and reassuring, and pulled her out from behind the desk. They moved into the smoke-filled corridor. The lights had been cut, leaving only the eerie, strobing red flashes of the emergency backup system. They made it halfway down the corridor toward the east wing when the shadows moved. 3 men in dark tactical gear stepped out from the intersecting hallway, raising short-barreled rifles. Before Nora could even raise her weapon, Dominic shoved her hard against the wall, stepping entirely in front of her to shield her body with his own. His Glock barked in the confined space, precise, lethal, terrifyingly efficient. 2 of the men dropped instantly, their armor failing to stop the hollow-point rounds placed perfectly beneath their helmets. But the 3rd man fired wildly before going down. A shadow launched itself from the stairwell, just as the volley of bullets chewed through the drywall. It was Declan. The massive enforcer tackled the 3rd gunman to the floor, ending the threat with a brutal strike from his heavy revolver. But as Declan stood up, he swayed. In the red emergency lighting, Nora saw the dark, glistening patch spreading rapidly across his tactical vest, just below his collarbone. "Declan!" Nora shoved past Dominic, dropping the Sig Sauer and rushing to the enforcer. Declan collapsed against the patterned wallpaper, sliding down to a sitting position, his breathing suddenly ragged and wet. "I'm fine," Declan gritted out, coughing a speck of blood onto his chin. "Just a scratch, Doc." "Shut up," Nora ordered, her medical training instantly overriding her terror. She ripped open the Velcro of his vest and tore his black Henley shirt down the middle. The entry wound was small, bubbling with pink, frothy blood. Tension pneumothorax. The bullet had punctured his lung, and air was filling his chest cavity, crushing his heart. "He's got a sucking chest wound. He's suffocating," Nora yelled to Dominic, who was currently sweeping the corridor, his gun trained on the darkness. "I need my medical bag from the bay, now." "We can't stop," Dominic said, his voice hard. "If we stop, they flank us. We carry him to the east wing." "If you carry him, he dies in 2 minutes," Nora snapped, glaring up at the syndicate boss. "His lung is collapsing. I have to decompress it right now. Cover us." She didn't wait for his permission. She dug frantically into the deep pockets of her scrubs. She always carried a basic trauma kit on shift, a habit she hadn't broken since moving in. She pulled out a crinkled plastic package containing an Asherman chest seal and a heavy 14-gauge angio-cath needle. "Declan, this is going to suck," Nora said, ripping the packaging open with her teeth. "Do it!" the giant wheezed, his eyes rolling back slightly. Nora wiped the slick blood from his chest with her sleeve, slapped the adhesive chest seal over the bullet hole to stop the air intake, and uncapped the massive needle. She found the second intercostal space on his massive chest, took a breath, and jammed the needle straight into his pleural cavity. A sharp hiss of trapped air escaped the needle. Declan gasped, his eyes flying open as his remaining lung rapidly expanded, dragging in precious oxygen. Dominic watched her from the corner of his eye, his gun still raised. The sheer awe in his expression was undeniable. Amidst the gunfire, the blood, and the chaos, Nora Dempsey was a force of nature. "Can he walk?" Dominic asked, his voice rough. "He can stumble," Nora corrected, pulling Declan's heavy arm over her shoulder. "Help me get him up." Together, the Mafia boss and the trauma nurse hauled the towering enforcer to his feet, dragging him the final 50 yards into the heavily fortified medical bay of the East Wing, slamming the steel-reinforced doors shut just as another volley of bullets echoed down the hall. The medical bay was dead silent, save for the hum of the backup generator and Declan's heavy, stabilized breathing on the trauma cot. The siege had lasted 45 minutes. Silas and the remaining Caldwell men had turned the first floor into a slaughterhouse, effectively crushing the O'Callaghan hit squad. The surviving attackers had fled into the rainy night, leaving behind a shattered mansion and 6 dead bodies. Nora stood over a stainless steel sink, scrubbing Declan's blood from her hands with harsh iodine soap. Her hands were shaking violently. The adrenaline crash had finally hit, leaving her hollowed out, nauseous, and deeply aware of how close she had come to dying. The heavy steel door hissed open. Dominic walked in. He was stripped of his suit jacket, his white button-down shirt stained with plaster dust, and a smear of blood that wasn't his. He looked exhausted, lethal, and devastatingly handsome in the harsh fluorescent lighting. He walked past the sleeping Declan, coming to stand directly behind Nora at the sink. He didn't say a word. He simply reached out, his large hands gently covering her shaking, soapy ones. He turned off the faucet, took a clean towel, and slowly dried her hands, his touch deliberately tender, a stark contrast to the violence he had just orchestrated. "You saved him," Dominic said quietly, his voice a low rumble vibrating in his chest. "You saved one of my ghosts." Nora leaned back slightly, her spine resting against his solid chest. She was too tired to fight the proximity. "He needs a hospital, Dominic, a real one. He needs a chest tube and a surgeon, not a nurse with a pocket needle." "My private surgical team is 10 minutes out. They'll transfer him to a secure clinic," Dominic assured her. He turned her around so she was facing him. He lifted a hand, gently wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheekbone. "Are you hurt?" "No," Nora whispered, staring up into his storm-grey eyes. "I have never met anyone like you." "Nora," he murmured, leaning in, his face inches from hers. The heavy scent of gunpowder and bergamot surrounded her. "They breached my fortress. They brought war to my home, and you didn't run. You stood your ground." "I told you," she breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs for an entirely different reason now. "I do my job." Before Dominic could close the final distance between them, his encrypted cell phone buzzed violently in his pocket. The moment shattered. Dominic pulled back, his jaw clenching in irritation as he answered the phone. "Speak," Dominic commanded. He listened for a moment, his expression darkening into a terrifying mask of pure fury. "I'm coming down. Keep him alive until I get there." He hung up, looking at Nora. Silas captured one of the O'Callaghan men, a lieutenant named Sean Gallagher. He was trying to crawl out through the rose garden. I need to have a conversation with him about how they bypassed my security grid. Nora felt a chill run down her spine. A conversation. "Stay here, lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me." Dominic turned and strode out of the medical bay, the steel door clicking shut behind him. Nora was alone in the quiet hum of the room. She checked Declan's vitals. Stable for now. She walked out of the bay and down the short hall to Leo's room to check on her primary patient. Leo was fast asleep, his IV drip delivering a steady flow of saline and antibiotics. The younger Caldwell had slept through the entire ordeal, heavily sedated. Nora sighed, moving to adjust the IV bag. As she reached up, her foot kicked something under Leo's bed. It slid across the hardwood floor with a soft, plastic clatter. She frowned, crouching down to pick it up. It was a small, empty glass vial. Nora rotated it in the dim light, her medical training automatically reading the label. Potassium chloride, 10 milliequivalents. Her blood ran cold. Potassium chloride was an essential electrolyte, but administered rapidly via IV, it was completely lethal. It stopped the heart instantly, mimicking a massive, untraceable heart attack. It was the exact drug she had jokingly threatened Dominic with weeks ago. She had not checked out this vial from her inventory. Panic rising, Nora looked closely at Leo's IV line. Attached to the secondary injection port was a fresh needle puncture. Someone had pushed a syringe into the line recently. The explosion. The hit squad. It was all a distraction. The O'Callaghan's didn't send 20 men to shoot up the first floor. They sent 20 men to draw Dominic and the ghosts away from the east wing so an assassin could slip in and quietly execute his younger brother. But who? The security grid was bypassed from the inside. Nora bolted out of Leo's room, running back to the medical bay's locked pharmacy cabinet. She frantically punched in her code and pulled open the heavy drawer containing the narcotic and lethal drug inventory. The digital log on the side of the cabinet blinked. Someone had accessed it using a master override code 30 minutes ago, right when the gunfire started. Nora scrolled through the access log. The name flashed on the screen, burning itself into her retinas. User override, Dr. W. Sterling. Dr. William Sterling. Dominic's most trusted underground surgeon. The man who had operated on Leo the night Nora first met them. The man who was currently 10 minutes out to supposedly save Declan. Sterling had sold them out. He had provided the security codes to the O'Callaghan's, triggered the breach, and used the chaos to slip into Leo's room and inject the lethal dose. Nora spun around, staring at the clock. If Sterling injected the potassium into the primary IV bag 30 minutes ago, it was mixing with the saline. It would hit Leo's bloodstream any second. She sprinted back down the hall, her sneakers squeaking on the hardwood. She burst into Leo's room, lunging for the IV stand. She ripped the tubing directly out of the access port in Leo's arm, sending the deadly saline splashing onto the floor. Leo groaned, stirring slightly as the needle was ripped from his vein. "Sorry, Leo, sorry," Nora gasped, her hands shaking as she grabbed a clean bandage and slapped it over his bleeding arm. My, you really are a nuisance, Miss Dempsey." Nora froze. The voice came from the shadows of the doorway. Dr. William Sterling stepped into the room. He was dressed in a pristine charcoal suit, carrying a black leather medical bag. He didn't look like a mob doctor. He looked like a wealthy plastic surgeon. But in his right hand, equipped with a heavy silencer, was a compact Beretta. "You're the mole," Nora breathed, stepping in front of Leo's bed, shielding the sleeping boy with her body. "Dominic is a visionary, but he pays terribly compared to the O'Callaghan's," Sterling sighed, raising the weapon. It was supposed to look natural, the stress of the attack causing cardiac arrest. But now, I suppose I'll have to tell Dominic you snapped under the pressure of the siege and injected him yourself. Tragic, really. Sterling cocked the hammer of the pistol. "Goodbye, Nora." Dr. William Sterling stepped fully into the dimly lit room, the heavy silencer of his Beretta catching the faint glow of the street lamps outside. He looked entirely out of place in the middle of a Mafia war zone, looking more like he was dressed for a gala at the Waldorf Astoria than an assassination. A gleaming Patek Philippe watch peeked out from his starched French cuff as he adjusted his grip on the weapon. "You're making a terrible mistake, William," Nora said, her voice shaking but her stance entirely unyielding. She kept her body firmly planted between the gun and Leo's bed. "It's just business, my dear," Sterling sighed, stepping closer. "Dominic is a sinking ship. The O'Callaghan's offered me triple my current retainer, plus a seat on the board of their new legitimate pharmaceutical shell company. I couldn't say no to generational wealth. Now step aside. A bullet to your head completely ruins the narrative of a stress-induced cardiac event. If you shoot me, Dominic will hear it," Nora bluffed, her mind racing through the inventory of the room. "With a suppressor, amidst the chaos outside?" Sterling chuckled, a dry, condescending sound. "He is currently torturing Sean Gallagher in the basement. He won't be up here for hours. By then, I will have administered a second dose, cleaned up your little mess, and called the time of death myself. He raised the gun, aiming it squarely at her chest. Last chance, Nora. Move. Nora's eyes darted to the heavy, motorized Stryker medical bed Leo was resting on. She knew the mechanics of these beds intimately. Her hand slowly slid backward, her fingers wrapping around the thick, red emergency release lever positioned at the foot of the frame. "You're a doctor," Nora whispered, stalling for a single second more. "You took an oath." "I took a payout," Sterling corrected, his finger whitening on the trigger. Nora yanked the red lever with all her body weight. The hydraulic lock on the Stryker bed disengaged with a loud mechanical clank. Because the room was built on a very slight, almost imperceptible decline toward the doorway for fluid drainage, an architectural quirk Nora had noticed on her first day, the heavy bed immediately lurched forward. Sterling, who had been standing mere inches from the footboard, gasped as 1,000 pounds of metal and machinery slammed directly into his knees. The impact buckled his legs instantly. He fired a reflex shot, but the bullet went wide, shattering the glass casing of the wall-mounted blood pressure monitor. As Sterling fell backward, his head cracking against the hardwood floor, the gun slipped from his grasp, skittering under a nearby armchair. Nora didn't hesitate. She didn't run for the door. Instead, she lunged for the heavy, steel Baxter, 4-pole standing next to the bed. She hoisted the solid metal rod like a baseball bat, spinning around just as Sterling groaned and tried to push himself up on his elbows. She swung the heavy steel base down with brutal efficiency, striking him squarely across the jaw. There was a sickening crunch. Sterling collapsed, his eyes rolling back in his head, entirely unconscious. Nora dropped the IV pole. It hit the floor with a deafening clang that echoed down the quiet hallway. She stood over the corrupt surgeon, her chest heaving, her hands covered in Leo's blood from the ripped IV, staring at the man she had just violently subdued. "Well," a low, dark voice resonated from the doorway. "Remind me never to dispute your medical opinions." Nora whipped her head around. Dominic was standing in the doorway. He was covered in sweat and a fresh layer of grime, holding his Glock at his side. His chest was rising and falling rapidly. He had clearly sprinted up the stairs the moment he heard the muffled gunshot, fully prepared to tear the world apart to get to her. Instead, he found his fearless nurse standing victorious over a traitorous assassin. Dominic walked slowly into the room, his eyes scanning the shattered monitor, the disconnected IV line spilling onto the floor, and finally resting on the crushed vial of potassium chloride. He was a man who calculated everything in milliseconds. He pieced the story together instantly. He looked down at Sterling, his expression shifting from shock to a terrifying, cold fury. He bypassed the grid, Nora breathed, her adrenaline finally beginning to crash. He was going to kill Leo, make it look like a heart attack. He had a gun, Dominic. Dominic stepped over Sterling's body and closed the distance between him and Nora. He didn't look at his brother or the traitor on the floor. He only looked at her. He reached out, his large hands gripping her shoulders, pulling her flush against his chest. "You're shaking," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion Nora had never heard from the ruthless syndicate boss. He pressed his lips fiercely to the crown of her head, burying his face in her hair. "You saved him. Again. And you took down a man twice your size to do it." "I think I broke his jaw," Nora mumbled against his ruined shirt, finally allowing herself to lean into his strength. "I'm going to break a lot more than his jaw," Dominic promised softly, his eyes darkening as he glared down at the unconscious doctor. "Silas!" The giant enforcer appeared in the doorway seconds later, his scarred face unreadable as he took in the scene. "Take out the trash," Dominic ordered, not releasing his hold on Nora. "And call the team at Rush University Medical Center. Tell Dr. Aris we need a secure wing prepped for Declan immediately. We are done using underground butchers." Silas nodded, dragging Sterling out of the room by his collar as if he weighed nothing. By dawn, the Caldwell estate was quiet. A heavy, somber stillness had settled over the mansion. A private cleanup crew had already erased the blood and debris from the first-floor marble, replacing the shattered glass and boarding up the breached walls. Declan had been safely transported to a secure, private suite at Rush Memorial, under heavily armed guard, his lung successfully repaired. Leo, oblivious to how close he had come to death, was resting comfortably with a fresh, untampered IV line. Nora sat on the leather sofa in Dominic's study, clutching a mug of black coffee. She had finally changed out of her bloody scrubs into a pair of clean sweatpants and a borrowed cashmere sweater that smelled intensely of Dominic. The heavy mahogany doors opened, and Dominic walked in. He had showered and changed into a fresh black button-down and slacks, looking devastatingly sharp, despite having fought a war only hours prior. He walked over to his massive oak desk, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound ledger. He carried it over to the sofa, sitting down beside her. The proximity made Nora's breath hitch. Dominic flipped the ledger open to a page near the middle. He pulled a gold fountain pen from his pocket and drew a single, heavy, black line through a name. Richard Dempsey. $400,000. He didn't stop there. He wrote the word "paid in full" across the page, signed his initials, and tore the page entirely out of the book. He held the paper out to her. "Your father's debt is erased," Dominic said, his voice quiet, devoid of its usual commanding edge. "My men will never approach him, or your sister Clara, ever again. The contract we made, the 6 months, it's void." Nora stared at the piece of paper. It was her freedom. It was a return to her cramped walk-up in Pilsen, her grueling shifts at Cook County ER, and her safe, predictable, lonely life. "I don't understand," Nora whispered, looking up at him. "I've only been here a few weeks." "You saved my brother's life twice," Dominic said, his grey eyes locking onto hers with a burning intensity. "You saved one of my best men. You stood your ground in a firefight, and you protected my family when my own people betrayed me. You have paid this debt 10 times over, Nora." He reached over to the side table, picking up a sleek silver lighter. He sparked a flame and held it to the corner of the ledger page. They both watched in silence as the paper caught fire, burning away the chains that had brought her to the estate. He dropped the ashes into a crystal ashtray. "Silas has a car waiting out front," Dominic continued, his jaw tightening slightly, as if the words physically pained him to say. "He will take you home. You will have a security detail watching your apartment from a distance for the next month, just to ensure the O'Callahans don't retaliate. After that, you are free." Nora looked at the ashes. Then she looked at the man beside her. She saw the ruthless mob boss who commanded an empire of ghosts. But she also saw the man who had shielded her with his own body without a second thought. The man who looked at her not as a pawn, but as an equal. She thought about the ER, the endless cycle of strangers, the sterile, lonely nights. And then she looked around the chaotic, dangerous, fiercely loyal world she had somehow become the center of. "What if I don't want to leave?" Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic froze. For the first time since she had met him, the untouchable Dominic Caldwell looked genuinely caught off guard. "Nora, you don't belong in this world. It is violent, and it is cruel." "I am a trauma nurse, Dominic," she said, turning her body fully toward him. I deal with blood, broken bones, and death every single day. I'm not afraid of the dark, and more importantly, she reached out, her fingers gently tracing the line of his jaw. I'm not afraid of you. Dominic let out a ragged breath. The careful restraint he had been holding on to shattered completely. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs sweeping across her cheekbones. If you stay, Dominic warned, his voice dropping to a dark, possessive rumble, there is no walking away. You will be mine, the queen of this syndicate, and heaven help anyone who ever tries to take you from me. I'm counting on it, Nora whispered, right before she closed the distance and pulled him down to her. His kiss was like the man himself, commanding, consuming, and fiercely protective. Outside the shattered windows, the sun finally broke through the Chicago skyline, casting a golden light over the fortress. Everyone in the city feared the Caldwell Syndicate. But as Dominic held her like she was the most precious thing in his brutal world, Nora knew the truth. She wasn't a hostage anymore. She had just become the most powerful person in the room. What an incredible journey for Nora and Dominic. From a terrifying standoff in a bloody lobby to standing side by side as the undisputed king and queen of the Chicago underworld, this story proves that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the only ones who can truly protect you. Nora didn't just survive the Mafia. She conquered it with her bravery and brilliance. Did you love the intense medical drama mixed with the dark, protective Mafia romance? Let me know your favorite twist in the comments below. Would you have had the courage to rip out that IV and fight back against the corrupt doctor? If you want more gripping, edge-of-your-seat stories filled with fearless heroines, ruthless anti-heroes, and jaw-dropping plot twists, hit that like button, share this video with your fellow romance drama lovers, and subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. See you in the next one.